Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you guys for joining us. We are excited to go through the latest and greatest of the Unit21 platform, AI risk infrastructure. So before we get started, just a few logistics. This is being recorded. It'll be available on the same link later today or anytime thereafter for you to review. If you're having any kind of technical difficulties, if you scroll down the website page, there's a few FAQs that help troubleshoot audio or visual. Without any chats in the chat, it seems like everyone can hear me, which is great. So, and then on the right-hand panel here, there's chat, which is great to interact with each other, as well as a Q&A tab. So at any point in time, drop questions in there. We want it to be interactive and want you guys to, we'll jump on the questions that are relevant to what we're speaking about, also holding 5-10 minutes at the end for questions. So with that, I am joined by Kunal and Connor. Kunal, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining. Just quick intros. My name is Kunal. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Unit21. Connor, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kunal. My name is Connor Snodgrass. For those of you who've not joined one of our webinars before, I lead our solutions engineering team.
All right.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into polls. Hold tight, Kunal. I'm going to publish this and put this on stage. You should see in the chat there is a new poll. We want to gauge kind of where you guys are in your AI journey as we share, as we dive into the content. So let's see the responses coming in. Give it a few seconds. And Kunal, let's just kind of react real time here as things come in. It's evening out, but.
Yeah, this is interesting. So for reporting inside narrative writing, less than the false positives. False positives seems to be the main issue here. Just C1 for the analyst ramp time. Certainly interesting. No one yet for inconsistent decisioning across the team. Well-trained team.
Perfect judgment.
That's great.
All right, and let's jump into the second poll. I will publish that one in the chat and pop it up on the screen. So this is more about your journey of maturity and adoption. Here we go. There we go.
All right, we see some people who have been adopting AI. That's great to see.
I think we have some customers on the line.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, that's interesting. Someone with no plans. I'd love to hear more about that.
All right, great. Let's jump into it then.
Yeah. It's good to see. I think there's a sort of mix of adoption here. Most people seem to have actually done some sort of implementation for AI today. So hopefully today we can go into some more detail rather than sort of the high level and actually show you like how it works practically in the product in Unit21. If you have any questions and stuff, feel free to put them in the chat, or I think there's a Q&A situation as well in here. And then I'll try and answer them as I go. As well. But yeah, let's get right into it. Okay, so the challenge here is, alert volumes are growing and it's hard to scale a team. And if you have a large team, that comes with additional challenges too. Either you hire, but then you have problems with like inconsistency, decisioning, training, things like that is also expensive. And then, actually, I think the thing I like to talk about here is like rather than like the letter of the regulations, which is like, oh, I got to meet my deadlines. It's really the spirit of them is like we want to try and catch as much of this activity as we possibly can, and conducting in-depth reviews is not always, operationally possible given the constraints that we live within. So a few things here, right? Alert volumes outpace hiring. Legacy tools, it's hard to adapt. Even within a newer tool, right? Rules that are built a long time ago don't adapt to catch new patterns. And that kind of thing takes manual effort, right? Whether it's data analysis within a tool that you have or externally, and then actually going ahead and updating those rules. Um, and then, yeah, manual L1 work is expensive to do. Especially one thing we see a lot is like the in-depth reviews are only done usually on like high risk entities. And I think one thing that's pretty cool with AI is that the operational constraint is sort of lifted, right? And you can actually do more in-depth reviews on a larger segment of your population too, in addition to the obvious efficiency gains. Yeah, so I see a question here from Jean Robert. Is that how you say your name? Um, is Yeah, so it is not only for after the fact analysis. The AI agent on L1 reviews is for alert reviews. That's correct. We also have an AI agent on the rules side, which we call the detection agent or rule recommendations. You may hear it that way. What that does is it reviews your alerts that have been completed by AI or by humans, looks at things like narratives, notes, comments, as well as the other data that you have in there, and then recommends rules for you based on basically what you have today, to try and catch more of what you're looking for, as well as reduce your false positive volumes upfront. Okay. So sort of ties in actually to this slide here is like there's two sides to AI agents, at least within Unit21. There's AI agents for investigation as well as for detection. And, we're trying here to mirror pretty much what humans do. Today is really both sides of these things. On the investigation side, of course, like actually working on alerts, like working through alerts, right, with tasks customizable per queue. You can set up your own agents, even build your own tasks, if you want. Customize things like narrative outputs, which then tie into decisions on those alerts. But then those feed back into the AI agent for detection, which actually recommends new rules to you or adjustments to existing rules based on those reviews, creating this sort of loop that continues on through through the life cycle. There's another question here. Does your solution come with an API for live analysis? It's a good question. We're open to discussing that. It is something that we've talked about internally, and there are a couple of customers where this is of interest. In particular, like also like an MCP server is something that we're looking at. Right now, the way it works, and there are many reasons why I would actually recommend doing that within the UI itself, particularly around automation bias, and basically mitigating that. Our UI is very thoughtfully designed to try and mitigate the risks of automation bias, especially in a regulated environment like this. I'm happy to talk more about that afterwards as well, Jean, if you'd like. Great question, though. All right, so yeah, operational AI, not experimental AI. So we certainly do have a bunch of experimental things running in the back, like that we're also working on, right? We want to make sure we're on the edge of technology, and especially as it's changing quickly. But the AI agents that you're going to see today here have been in production for almost a year now, if not longer. We started our initial explorations into AI back in 2023 when it was ChatGPT, when ChatGPT came out, and then GPT-3, the first model really that was opened up to via API, was published by OpenAI. That was when we began our journey here. And things have changed a lot since then. So we've had these AI agents in production for a long time. It executes the work, right? But also importantly shows you the work, both on the investigation side as well as on the rules side, like giving you actual justifications and sources, and then ultimately learns from its outcomes, feeding back both into the decisioning logic as well as into your rules. And then, yeah, it's already running at scale. This is, a ton that's already been saved in analyst time, over $10 million converted. 93% fewer false positives, and then 83% faster investigations across the board. with some major customers here that have mentioned, how they've been leveraging it in practice. So it's just to clarify that again, it's not experimental, right? This is very real, and we're excited to show you this today. So with that, Connor, if you want to dive right in to the demo, and please keep the questions
Let's go. And Kunal, keep me posted if we have any questions that I miss. So kind of starting here with the idea of these AI agents. And we have agents at 3 different levels today. So you can create alert agents, you can create case agents, as well as filing agents. And for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time playing within our tool, you can also create queues within alerts, cases, and filings. So you could, even within just an alert, have multiple stages of review. And that's why we allow our customers to create many, many agents. And you might have, agents that are designed for EDD, for an L1 triage, or for watch list screening reviews. And you might have case agents that are designed for investigations once you get to kind of a more advanced investigatory stage. And you might have filing agents that are designed to help you write up the narratives that you're going to use for filing. And these agents themselves are broken up into these discrete individual tasks so that you can design each of them to do the set of things that you would normally ask a human analyst to do for a particular investigation. And so, if we take a look at this, for this review, we might be reviewing the flagged activity itself. So that might be things like looking at the current alert, might be looking at things like historical alerts, cases, and filings. We might be looking at account risk factors. So we might look at the customer's age, their geographical risk, the network analysis to see if there are any shared phone numbers, social securities, addresses connected to other entities. We might want to look at, many to one or one to many activity. You can even kind of create your own tasks. So if our out of the box tasks kind of don't do all of the things that you need, you can create your own that use all of your own proprietary data and analyze this just the way that you would. And you can turn on whatever tasks are relevant for a particular investigation. We can also look at things like, behavioral patterns. So we might look for signs of structuring or impossible travel or repeat payments, or corridor analysis. We might do online research to look for adverse media or do employment verification or do research on counterparties. We might do 314A match analysis or sanctions match analysis, or we might do like a pre-RFI analysis as part of your process. And we can even do document analysis. So if you have evidence that shows up, instead of as structured data, as a PDF or a spreadsheet or something like that, we can also analyze that in conjunction with everything else in the system.
Yeah, Connor, there's a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and address that. So Kurt, sounds like, so the question is, what's the recommended balance between default out-of-the-box agents designed by Unit21 versus agents that customers create themselves? I think this is a great question. So the way we went about this, and I think this may help answer the question, is, we've been in this business now for about 7 or so years. And primarily the product was built for humans to conduct investigations and write rules and so on. The advantage to that is now we have this very rich, data set of exactly what a good investigation looks like. Also, the other advantage, we had like this QA tool we've had for years, which you can sort of randomly sample, and people use this for performance, for their analysts to see like who's a good analyst versus not, basically. And so the advantage with this is that a lot of the out of the box tasks, there's two things. One thing we did was we looked across all our data to see, okay, what are some of the most common things that people do across the board that are applicable for pretty much any kind of investigation that you would want to do? And then we've tuned these tasks not only from the prompt level, but also context engineering, making sure that the right context is actually handed to each of these tasks. And then tested, right, against this evaluation set of historical data to ensure that the performance is consistent and good. Um, so this is the advantage to using out-of-the-box tasks. Now, the downside here is that maybe your business is unique. And I did a quick, check. It looks like, let's say like investment or savings or something like that. I'm assuming maybe Kurt is where you're coming from. There might be unique tasks that you are doing or types of maybe fraud or money laundering that you expect to see in your business, which are not handled here. And you want to do something super specific. And for this, you have the ability to customize the tasks and build them yourself. You can even test those on historical data. Some of the other customizations we see pretty commonly are on online search. People want to be able to search on very specific terms based on their business or based on the kind of activity they're looking for. The other customization we see is narratives, like maybe if you're working with a sponsor bank or something like that, if you're a fintech, maybe your sponsor bank has asked you for a very particular narrative format, or maybe that's something that you do internally, right, for your own reasons, even if you're not working with a sponsor bank. And here again, we see a lot of the customization that people want to do, but you also have the ability to create your own custom nodes and graphs, actually to have the AI agent traverse certain data that you might be sending in. So really up to you. Again, there's an advantage to using the out-of-the-box tasks because it's just kind of out there. Yeah, this is the customization, like the hyper-customized tasks. If you want to build out your own thing, you can actually just prompt it. It'll create this graph for you so you can validate that as like, this is exactly the data that I would look for as an analyst. And then you can test that on historical. You can see test your task on historical alerts to make sure that it's working consistently in the way that you would expect. So great question. I know a short question, long answer, but I hope that answered your question, Kurt. Another question here from Soyam Siddha. So, and I see we share a last name, but perhaps you're Bengali, given the spelling. Are you guys using LLMs like Claude and OpenAI? If yes, how do you handle the privacy aspect? This is an excellent question. Yeah, so we are using we have built out this basically multi-agent orchestration system under the hood. And it's multi-model in its approach. So we don't have like one particular LLM provider that we are like stuck to. The way we do it is we are basically monitoring consistently these benchmarks. So if you go online and you can look for AI benchmarks basically for each of these models, there's a whole bunch of them now designed for particular types of tasks. And certain models are better at certain tasks than others. And then that changes over time. So a real life example of this is, previously we were using Claude for a document analysis task. And we use different models for different tasks depending, right, on what the best is. So we were using Claude, I think it was one of the Sonnet models at the time, 4.5, for document analysis task. And we saw that
It appears we may have lost Kunal for a second. Hopefully he gets back to us. But kind of to try to finish the story that he was starting, what we ended up seeing is that for that particular task for document analysis, that Claude model wasn't as performant as something like Mistral. And so we ended up changing and prioritizing Mistral for document analysis because the output was higher quality. And this kind of multi-agent, multimodal approach allows us to optimize each of these tasks individually to get the best possible performance. And because we're, as Kunal mentioned, each of these tasks represents a discrete call to an LLM, we're able to optimize the prompt and the context window for each of these tasks individually, rather than it being like one giant call to a single LLM that gives you a kind of one huge and probably inconsistent output. And so each of these tasks run in parallel. They're optimized. And then Kunal mentioned this a few minutes ago, but you can also create kind of a meta prompt for the narrative. And what this will do is it'll take the outputs from all of the tasks and incorporate them into a draft narrative that's written up kind of with like a full write-up of the rationale for the investigation and for the recommendation that it's made. And as of today, the two recommendations that the AI agent will make are that an alert should be escalated for review, or that it should be closed as a false positive. And if you choose, it's very much not a default option, and you can choose this on a per agent basis. You can assign it to auto close alerts, so that if it's found that an alert is a false positive, you can actually enable the AI agent to close those out automatically. And then on the back end, you can sample the AI agent's work with QA/QC. So just like you would, a human analyst, you can sample and validate that the output and that the decisions are meeting your standards.
So Connor, I'm back. I'm not sure if you ended up answering the question about the multi-model.
I did my best to do a Kunal impression.
That's great. Yeah, sorry guys, I had a network issue. Just briefly on that, I don't know where you all heard me leave off, but what I wanted to share was on the document analysis task. I think is a good example of this, where we tested. Used to use one of the cloud models, and then we saw the benchmark shift, and we actually tested out a bunch of different models. And it turns out that at the moment, at least as of this recording, I suppose, Mistral, which is a French provider, actually, they are currently the best for document analysis type tasks. And so we've switched out the model under the hood for document analysis tasks to use Mistral. But that may change tomorrow or next week. And so we've sort of built our architecture in this flexible way that we can use others. The other thing is around for customer data, proprietary customer data, and not sharing that. The way that this works is everything is hosted within AWS using what's called Bedrock. So AWS provides a service called Bedrock, which basically makes sure that the data doesn't actually leave the environment. So the models are hosted within that AWS environment itself, rather than going to the model provider servers. That way we can ensure privacy, and we only will use models that are actually available within Bedrock, which is a pretty wide variety. And they're continuously adding to that too. So this is sort of how we handle that. Also, it's never used to train models themselves. I hope that answers your question, by the way, so I'm said that. Great. All right, back to you, Connor.
All right, thanks. All right, so we talked about this a little bit. We talked about narrative instructions and how you would assign these to queues. But what does that look like then kind of on the, do we have an agent to look at social media information? You could definitely set one up. I think you could do an online media search. One of the things that is true about online media search is you can think of it like a kind of a Google search. And so we can optimize the keywords. But if that social media information is set to private and isn't available kind of publicly, we wouldn't have access to it. But if it is, we certainly can.
All right, and then how do you guys utilize AI in verdicts for cases, and how are observations done by AI, and what recommendations AI suggests for the case? Yeah, so Connor briefly touched on this. Briefly, we have two decision types, right? And the one decision type is close as false positive. The other decision type is escalate for a human to review. And what that means is just like, hey, someone should look at this. You can, of course, auto close those as well. The way those decisions happen is based on, actually, if you want to click on one of the yellow chips, Connor, just for escalate to review, and then on the side panel, you'll see the actual recommendation and like why that decision was made. So we're very big on like explainability, right? Like I think rather than just trusting an AI, it's like trust but verify. Actually look through the results and make sure that it is doing what you would otherwise have done. Is it actually following the kind of logic that you would have done? And you can actually set that up yourself as well, just as simply as just put it in your narrative instructions. And the reason we do that is because that is the standard thing that normally you would do anyway, rather than like a special thing that you have to do separately. Um, and then it'll actually take that into consideration in order to make a decision on one way or another. So it doesn't even have to be. I think the advantage to that is it doesn't have to be like a black and white judgment, which oftentimes we find when interviewing our customers is, a lot of these judgments aren't pure black and white. There's a lot in the gray area. And you can actually train up just like you would train a human analyst to be able to make better decisions. You can actually instruct the AI to make those kinds of decisions for you. The kinds of observations are all based on the tasks, what we call tasks in our system that you set up. So depending on the data that you're pulling in from those tasks, but obviously and always, the more data, the better. Does that answer your question, Vishesh? Just give me a little thumbs up. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So we talked a little bit about what this would look like, for an escalation. You can also see an example here of one where we close, it was recommended that we close this as a false positive. In this case, watch list hit, where we had a weak name match. There were some geographic disparities, contextual differences. And you can, again, clearly see the decision factors that went into this determination. In a world in which you turn on automatic closure of false positives, we'd probably get rid of this column entirely, because all that your team is going to be looking at are going to be the investigations that were recommended for escalation. And Kunal mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think with the case studies, but even before we turned on auto closure, we have customers reporting 80-90% reductions in average handle time, and that's before we even allowed them to do that. So we're probably going to get even closer to like 95% reductions in average handle time using this technology. If we want to take a look at what the output is going to look like for an individual alert, as an analyst gets to this, this has been escalated for review. We can see, there were impossible travel patterns, behavioral changes, counterparties that were flagged in fraudulent cases, a very large history, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all coming out of these tasks, and we can then dig into the output of each individual task. You can see kind of a summary of everything that we found here. But you can also, if you want, dig into each individual task output and see kind of the long version of like the rule analysis, for example. All of this is then also going to be compiled into this narrative in the format that we have asked this agent to compose it. And it is a draft narrative. So if your analyst gets here and decides that they want to make changes to this, you can always come in and edit this narrative before you add it to the record. And then I won't spend a ton of time on all of the other tools that we have within the case management system, because I know that's not the purpose of today's demo. But everything else that you would expect an analyst to have access to is still going to be here. You're still going to have, full visibility into who, what, when, where, why, so that you can complete your portion of the investigation before deciding how you want to resolve this alert. And then that will feed back into some of the other agents that Kunal talked about earlier. So we'll take your analyst dispositions into account and use that to reinforce the training for alert recommendations, as well as the training data that we use for rule recommendations. And what this is doing, oh, sorry, I gotta switch over here. What this is doing is taking all of the feedback we get about not necessarily true or false positivity, but which alerts were worth reviewing and not worth reviewing. And we get all of the context and the underlying data, the customer data, the transaction data, everything, and can then make recommendations to say, hey, you've got, in this case, a fairly generic many to one, one to many rule. And it's generating more false positives than you ideally would like. And we see some patterns in here that are not giving us the results that we want. Some patterns in the true positives that we see, things like rapid multi-counterparty activity, account compromise, things like that. And so this agent can actually make recommendations about changes to the trigger conditions. So we might want to exclude business entities or create a variation of this rule that looks at business entities. We might want to exclude new accounts. We might want to change the actual thresholds. Right now, those thresholds are sitting at 3, 5, and 10. And based on our results, 4, 6, and 12 might actually be more appropriate. We also might want to look at account maturity and transaction patterns. We might want to incorporate something like some of the KYC data that we collected, or if we're building a business version of this, we might want to use like NAICS codes to look at higher risk businesses and be more specific. And I think a lot of our customers, like they want to do this, but it can be a challenge to be able to do the analysis to justify to your regulators why you should make a change. Or if you're thinking about a fraud rule, to like get really, really specific on what should the optimal threshold be. And what this is really doing is surfacing those insights to you from your own investigation results and giving you the ability to kind of take this, directly create a rule configuration from those insights, and then be able to test this against your own historical data. So you can create this rule and then back test it or turn it on as a shadow rule, analyze the output of that before you decide, hey, actually, yeah, we want to turn this on and maybe have this become the new version of an existing rule. And then one other thing that we're doing with AI here is we've started opening up the ability to actually build rules from scratch using text, having an LLM interpret the intent of that, analyze the data available, and actually build a rule configuration for you. So as an example, we might want to build like a historical deviation rule. And looking at this, it's analyzed our behavior, looking at transactions as the sender in the last 7 days, in the last 60 days, and then has built the rule conditions. And similar to what we just saw, you can take this and say, okay, now I want to go test this and figure out, is this the best possible version of this rule before you turn this on. But instead of having to build your own variables, build your own conditions from scratch, you can just have the system do it for you, and then make tweaks and changes as needed. Kunal, I don't know about everybody else. I can't hear you.
Yeah, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, to add to this, there's the motivation behind this feature is we often see that practitioners will have a very deep knowledge of exactly the kind of activity that they're looking for, or like have a general idea of like what is the strategy, that I want to implement to be able to catch this kind of thing. But maybe haven't maybe they don't have a good idea of like the specific fields in their data and like what they're called, or maybe they don't know exactly, well, how should I build this rule in terms of what variable should I create or what trigger condition should I put in. So what we did here was, okay, you can put in like your general idea of like what you're looking for, and I think there's the example here that Connor shared, is more of like a general, this is kind of what I'm looking for, right? And what we do in the background is expand this out into like, what is the intent behind the rule, right? What is the kind of activity that they're likely looking for? And then based on what data do you have available, what do each of the fields mean semantically, right? Like what are they likely to be representing? And then based on that, come up with, all the variables and trigger conditions needed to actually identify this, along with like, of course, this text justification and transparency. The other thing I wanted to share here was this like side-by-side view that you're seeing here is very intentional. Like the reason we've done this is, I mentioned earlier on this idea of like automation bias, right? Like either over trust or under trust, both of which can be harmful in their own ways. And one of the things that we've seen in our experimentation here is like trust actually increases with views like this, right? Where there's easy access to alternative data or the justification for that source, for whatever the AI is doing. And having that easy access, like, for the justification helps you to understand, okay, this is why the AI agent made this decision before just jumping in and trusting it. Um, you know, so I think just something I wanted to call out around not only the feature itself, but also around the user experience and design of the product.
All right. Give it a minute for questions to roll in. Kunal, anything else you wanted to chat about with folks today?
Yeah, I'm curious actually from this group, you can put this in the chat as some sort of a more philosophical question here. One today, like people care a lot about false positives, and we saw that in the survey results as well. It's like a ton of false positives, and I'm curious, like what is the reason for that? Is it like an operational burden? Is that the primary reason? You can just put your answers in the chat. Like is operational burden the primary reason that you care about false positives? Or is there some other reason, right? Like maybe you're using those false positives to like, I don't know, create friction for a potentially good customers, And in that former category, I think something that's interesting to think about is if operational burden is no longer the constraint, do false positives matter anymore, Or can you just have an AI agent close out your false positives, write up the narratives, and all of that stuff? Like what would it really take for folks to be comfortable auto closing false positives?
Way to cue that up. We got a poll question here. So let me publish it, put it on the stage. We got a bonus question for you. If you guys can jump in here. What would need to be true for you to trust AI agents to auto close an alert?
It's funny, no one cares about regulator sign off. All right, we got one.
It's a peer pressure answer.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So of course, like I think that there's a lot of benefits to auto closing, but also that comes with risks. And I think we can see here, just to touch on like in the product, what we do offer. So full audit trail of its reasoning. Not sure if Connor shared that earlier, but we do retain a full audit trail all the reasoning that it went through, all the actions that it took as well. For example, if it wrote a narrative, we'll show you exactly what that was, and then what the data was that went into any decision that it makes or any recommendation. Human review of a sample, we offer like a random sampling feature. Basically, actually, this was initially for humans, like to randomly sample analysts' work, right? Pretty common, like QA/QC practice. But we find people using that actually for exactly this purpose, is like reviewing AI agent outputs, like a random sample in a given queue, even. So like people will split up AI agents by queue, say like just sanctions, and I only want that task running in a certain queue on only these alerts. Let's do a random sample of those and see like how does it perform over time. And then that I guess touches on the next one, is like accuracy is you can find that through the random sample. Although we are finding an interesting thing too, is like we have some customers who are using AI to QA the humans, which I think is an interesting sort of, it flipped it on its head a little bit, but a good use case too. Now, this is great. Thank you all for sharing your answers to this question.
All right, I think that is all we have today. We'd love to open it up to any additional questions that you guys may have. Otherwise, I will just queue this up. Oh, I gotta take the poll off the stage. 1 second. So if you'd like to learn more, and no one has any further questions, we have a few minutes. You guys can always book a demo with us. Lucky enough to maybe get paired with Connor one-on-one, and dive into your specific use case with a person, understanding personally how AI can work for you. I dropped the link as well, just in the chat. Sometimes QR codes are finicky. And with that, we'll give you a few minutes back. Thank you guys for the engagement and all of the great questions. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Peace. Thanks all.